All right, let's look at finding the domain of f of g. So composition of two functions. All right, so let's look at the following example. All right, f of x is x plus 1 over x, and g of x is x plus 1 over x plus 2. All right, so let's just find the domain of each separately. All right, so domain of f is fairly easy to find. Only problem is we have a fraction, so denominator cannot be 0. So in this case, x cannot be equal to 0. So here's the denominator. We can't have 0 there. All right, so we know that the only restriction is x is not equal to 0, so it cannot be 0. All right, we got that. All right, how about the domain of g? Right? It's actually pretty similar. Since we have a fraction, again, we have to make sure that the denominator is non-zero. Right? So we can solve, so we can say x plus 2 cannot be equal to 0, which means that we can just subtract 2 from both sides. So x cannot be negative 2. Right? So x cannot be negative 2. All right, so here, in order to find the domain of f of g, we need to satisfy two things, right? Number one, first one, x has to be inside the domain of the inside function. So g is the inside function, right? X has to be in the domain of g. All right, so which is what? So we know that x has to be inside the domain, so only condition is x cannot be negative 2. All right, so here we get this condition. X cannot be negative 2, right? To stay inside the domain of g. All right, number 2. This is the tricky one. It says that the g of x is in the domain of f. All right, so the inside function, in this case, that g of x is x plus 1 over x plus 2. So this is g of x, right? And it has to be in the domain of f. So domain of f is that the only condition is if x cannot be equal to 0. So g of x has to be non-zero, right? Because it has to be inside the domain of f, right? All right, so in order to solve it, so only way this becomes 0 is that x equals negative 1, right? So we know that this implies that x plus 1 cannot be equal to 0. And we can just subtract 1 from both sides. So x cannot be equal to negative 1. All right, so those are the two conditions. So negative 2 is bad, and the second condition set as negative 1 is also bad. All right, so the domain of f of g, you have to satisfy both conditions. So eliminate negative 2, eliminate negative 1, everything else is fine. So you just have to say negative infinity all the way to negative 2. Skip negative 2, right? So make sure to use the parentheses, and then go all the way to negative 1. Skip negative 1, then go all the way to positive infinity. Right? So this is the domain of f of g. Right? That's it. I hope that this was clear.